Hello, my name is Ashley Harmon, and I'm here to present to you my master's thesis, The Effects of Environmental Sounds on the Guessability of Animated Graphic Symbols. First, let's talk about augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. AAC is a relatively new addition to the field of speech-language pathology. AAC use can involve various types of symbol modalities, including graphic, auditory, gestural, tactile, and textured. The use of AAC involves aided and unaided communication systems. Graphic symbols are used in AAC devices. Let's talk about environmental sounds. Environmental sounds are a relatively new addition to the field of AAC, and are defined as all naturally occurring sounds other than speech and music. Most current studies focus on the environmental sounds themselves and their application for future research, instead of determining a universal set of environmental sounds to use for future studies. Semiotics is a science or theory of signs, and signs are objects or events that have meaning to the interpreter. These signs can also be called representations. Signs are categorized into icons, indexes, and symbols. A symbol represents its object by convention, like a shape that has an agreed upon meaning. So that street sign at the end, that stop sign at the end of your street corner, that is a symbol. An index is a representation that indicates a direct, causal, or real relation to the object itself, like an arrow pointing to that object. Most relevant to this study is the icon. An icon is any visual representation of an object or concept that communicates a similar object or concept. So forms of icons can be a drawing of an object, a photograph, hieroglyphics, or in this case, animations. Iconicity is any association that an individual forms between a symbol and its referent. So in this study, animations are part of an iconic system and will be interpreted by the subject to determine the meaning of the image. So there is a spectrum that determines how much the icon will resemble the referent. At one end you have transparent, where the meaning of the symbol can be readily guessed without the referent. On the other side you have opaque, where no relationship between the two is perceived even when the meaning is known. And translucent, where the relationship is perceived once the meaning is provided. So the relevancy of this to my thesis is that the addition of environmental sounds to animated images may elevate the translucent graphic symbols to transparency, or guessable graphic symbols. And this is of course provided that the sound animation clarifies the relationship between the referent and the symbol. The dual coding theory is a theory of processing that states a stimulus activates verbal and nonverbal representations within the brain. And this really looks at the contrast between processing verbal and nonverbal stimuli. So when a subject first sees a graphic object, the logogans, or the verbal representation, and the imagen, or the image representations, are both concurrently activated. And it has been shown that environmental sounds activate the auditory portion of the nonverbal channel. And this activation combines with the imagen to result in increased guessability of the animation logogan. And this helps to clarify any conceptual ambiguity. The process of naming includes 3 stages: identification, or recognizing the object, for example, upon seeing a ball, recognizing it's a ball and not a chair; name activation, or retrieving the name for the object in your lexicon, so retrieving the name ball in your brain; and then response generation, or stating the name, so you can say, oh, that's a ball. And the guessability task uses this process. So it's necessary to understand the meaning of the graphic symbol and retrieve the name within the lexicon base. So it has been shown that sound may have an adverse effect on identification of visual images. For example, a study in 2002 found that adding multiple beeps to a single flashing image resulted in participants believing that they saw multiple flashes instead of one flash. Additionally, a study in 1997 found that adding transient noise near collision of 2 moving disks resulted in participants believing the disks had collided instead of merely moved toward one another. Studies have also shown that sound may even overpower a visual stimulus. A study in 2005 found that a rolling sound added to a visual stimulus of a ball jumping in silence resulted in participants seeing a rolling ball instead of a ball jumping in silence. The purpose of this study is to determine if the addition of environmental sounds to animated graphic symbols will increase the guessability of the verbs in 46 typically developing 3-year-olds. By guessability, I mean the subject's ability to answer the question, "What's this?" My hypothesis is that the sound addition will have a positive impact on the symbol guessability. This study is a between-group study, or a normative design. Half the children were allocated to the graphic symbol plus sound condition, and the other half of the children were allocated to the graphic symbols only condition. The participants were 46 typically developing children aged 3-0 to 3-11 at the start of testing. They were recruited from daycares in the greater Boston area from the towns of Boston, Waltham, Wayland, Newton, and Swampscott. The inclusion criteria included a receptive one-word picture vocabulary test within 1.5 standard deviations from the age norm, receptive knowledge of the target verb, no uncorrected vision or hearing deficits, and English as a primary language spoken at home. The verbs were selected from the MacArthur-Bates Communicative Development Inventory by Fensendale et al. This is a parent report assessment normed on 1,800 children in 3 locations, and it includes 2 forms, the words and gestures and the words and sentences. The words and sentences contains normative information for children aged 16 to 30 months, and includes a list of 103 early developing verbs that are acquired by 50% of the normative group by 30 months of age. The CDI is a proven, valid, and reliable tool for assessing language development in typically developing children, late talking children, children with cochlear implants, and is also used as an outcome predictor for children with autism. The verbs of the CDI were compared against existing verbs in the Lexicon of Autism Language Program, or ALP, animated graphic set from Boston Children's Hospital. It was determined that 18 out of the 103 CDI verbs were paired with correlating ALP animations that featured environmental sounds. The procedures involved the receptive vocabulary screening using the receptive one-word picture vocabulary test, which is a gold standard in the field of speech-language pathology. It also involved pre-assessment of receptive knowledge using the verbs in the study. The participant was asked to identify the verb upon seeing the researcher perform it, or asked to perform the verbs themselves. For example, the researcher would have a paper and a marker and would draw a smiley face on the paper and ask the child, "What am I doing?" The child would say, "Drawing." And if the child says writing, the researcher at the end would hand the child the paper and the marker and say, "Can you draw?" Also, an environmental sound test was used to determine the child's ability to identify the source of common environmental sounds that were not used in the experimental phase of the study. And finally, the third phase was the experimental task. The test materials were presented on a late 2009 MacBook computer with a 13-inch screen, 2.26 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo processor, and a 4 GHz processing speed. The volume of the loudspeakers was variable and depended on the preschool space available. The tasks were presented using Microsoft PowerPoint, along with the digitized voice of the Director of Media Applications at Boston Children's Hospital at Waltham. And this pre-recording of the voice allowed for consistent instruction and exposure to each trial and intertrial intervals. Let's take a look at the environmental sound test.
Get ready. Look at the computer. Point to what makes this sound.
The child ideally selects the bell image, and the screen goes red. Now let's look at the third phase, the experimental phase, the verbs with environmental sound condition.
Get ready. Look at the computer. What's this?
The verb order was randomized, but it was kept consistent for each participant. As noted, the green screen with the instruction, "Get ready, look at the computer," precedes each slide with a symbol. The symbol display was accompanied by "What's this?" and the symbols in task were presented for 2 times the animation length, and the sound effect looped with the animation, and there was a pause of 3 seconds between each trial. Experimental tasks. The familiarization tasks were conducted before the experimental tasks, and the sound stimuli was presented via Bose loudspeakers with an Apogee 1 external sound card. Data, agreement, and fidelity of implementation. The data was recorded live on a pre-made form. An inter-rater agreement was conducted for 20% of participants in all experimental trials. A checklist was used to determine procedural reliability and was used by the researcher and an independent observer. The significance of the research. This research will impact the future learning of verbs by children. The study will be continued at the doctoral level in children with autism to determine if the same results are achieved. And as noted, the study eventually aims to benefit children with autism. So a total of 62 children participated in the study, with 46 children completing all study phases. An independent t-test was performed, yielding a significant effect in favor of sound. These recent findings prove that the addition of environmental sounds to animated graphic symbols do indeed increase the symbol's guessability in typically developing 3-year-olds. I look forward to further analyzing these results and determining their impact on future research. I would be greatly remiss if I did not thank my dedicated thesis committee for their support of this project, particularly my thesis chair, Ralf Schlosser. Thank you for your time. Please feel free to contact me with any questions at harmon.as@husky.neu.edu.